Whether we call it spiritual formation, Christian character, Christian education, discipleship, it's a challenging topic. We don't just want to have members being good church members. We want them to become more like Jesus. How do we do this kind of spiritual formation in our congregations? How do we not only grow our congregations numerically, but grow them in depth and into a deeper relationship with Christ? This vexing question was asked to 3 of our ministers, and we invite you to join us for the interviews that were held. And as you listen, I pray that you would reflect on what you're doing in your context and situation. How do we grow our people and help them to become more like Christ? I'm here with Nelson Manabile, and I'm wanting to talk to him a little bit about discipleship in the local congregation. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're serving.
Yes, like you said, my name is Nelson Manabile, from the Limpopo province, in a village called Bochum, but currently serving in the Highveld Presbytery St. Peter's congregation in Tembisa. This is my 4th year since 2022. Yes.
Okay. I always say when we get to our 4th and 5th year, that's when our congregations really begin to trust us and the real work begins.
Definitely. That's how it feels at the moment. Feeling like we are now knowing each other and what we stand for and represent, and it's just now finding that rhythm.
All right, so we're talking about discipleship in the local congregation. How do we help to help our members, as Paul says, to equip them for works of service, or this process of becoming more like Jesus? We call it sanctification, we call it discipleship, we call it Christian formation. But what are your thoughts around the subject? Why is discipleship a passion for you?
Thank you for that question, Theo. I think it is the core, it is the essence, it is the purpose of Christian work. It speaks to the purpose. I believe the Great Commission, when Christ instructs us to go and make disciples, it's literally telling us the cause of our calling. So it is, I think, the essence of Christianity. That's what we do. That's who we are. We are disciples, and we're making disciples.
In your context, what are the challenges and opportunities that you're experiencing as you're trying to kind of nurture a Christ-like character in the members of the local congregation?
I think it is quite a complex exercise in itself. I would say the entire discipleship making, it's quite a challenge. In a sense that we talk about Presbyterians. Now, that in itself speaks about a certain identity and cultural practices that exists. We talk about such people who come from different backgrounds, tribes and race and gender and age groups, purpose of the church itself. So it's just a lot of factors to consider when one wants to achieve this. And therefore, I find these diverse elements that are in place, especially when also dealing with the culture of the church. When you spoke earlier, you mentioned we are not called to make Presbyterians. That in itself speaks about another identity. And when you talk about discipleship, it's an identity in itself. And therefore, to bring those together and really find common ground of what a disciple is in a Presbyterian, in a context, that's quite a handful of exercise. And I find it very challenging, but also very exciting and thrilling. That one really sees the opportunity to depend on the Holy Spirit, and also to engage in a really meaningful and deep conversations to understand individuals' backgrounds, contextual backgrounds, and interpret the scriptures accordingly, and to also get to every single individual to understand themselves as a disciple based on their identity and character and gifts and talents. When I was speaking just 2 days ago with the other group in my church, I tell them, and I use the word gadgets. I said, we are spiritual gadgets that God wants to use. When Paul speaks about us being apostles, prophets, and pastors, and evangelists, and all that, he simply refers to us that we are gadgets that are fully equipped with softwares to do these things. And these conversations about scriptures and all things is just to clean all kind of viruses that could be there and dysfunctionalities and get it working again. It is in you. It must just be identified and expressed in who you are. And like you say, I'm in the 4th year in my church. We're trying to find our footing and rhythm and work. So we really are establishing committees and ministries and aligning them. And we don't do that based on any kind of prescribed work, but based on our talents, on giftings we have in the session amongst the youth. We look at what the human resources that we have, and we interpret such resources as God's gadgets in his hands to do his work, which is measured in the work of God. And that's for me is discipleship.
Wow. Yeah. I really like the image of us being gadgets. When our gadgets become prone to viruses, what does the maker of the gadget do? They send an update. Yeah.
And I would also add that to be a Presbyterian is actually an expression of being a disciple. It just needs to be interpreted that way, that in us being a Presbyterian, we're actually trying to put flesh on the bones, to say, as Christians in this context, in this denomination, that's what we mean, and that's what we represent.
You started talking about the deliberate strategies that you're employing in the local congregation. And
in my congregation, there are several strategies that we employ, and it speaks from different ministries as well. Because what works with the children ministry doesn't work with the youth, and what works with the youth doesn't work with the middle age and the elderly in the church. So such people or such groupings require specific attention and ministries, Bible studies, and teachings and guidance into what value as an elderly do you bring? What value does God put on an elderly person in a congregation or in a society? That needs to be reinterpreted, that needs to be affirmed and channeled and given a space to express itself in the church and in the society. And we have developed a very beautiful, I think I spoke briefly about with you last year regarding the children ministry curriculum that flows very nicely with the youth programs that we have, the catechism class. It is very deliberate. It is very deliberate in terms of the teachings that we put there, the kind of doctrines we want to instill, personalities we want to develop, characters and behaviors. And that is not just my thing. It all started with developing a strategic plan where the whole congregation was part of it in developing it to say, where are we and where do we want to take this church and how do we understand and interpret the mission of God and the discipleship? And everything was drafted accordingly to say a child in our church should be able to recite these things, and the purpose of them to know this kind of recitations is so that they can have this kind of character and belief systems in them, so that when they get to a class, catechism class, this is now the broader explanation and teachings of what they know as just chants and songs and everything. So it is a very aligned systems, teachings, and we know the outcome we want to produce. And that outcome is a cooperative strategy that we have built together as a church. And we're seeing fruits of that. That has taken consideration of our context. We have challenges in our society. So we know that young people in our context, specifically Tembisa, very exposed to wrong things, wrong influence, wrong mentors, You find young people inspired by drug lords, gangsters, leaders, and we want to take men fellowship, we take women fellowship, we say, you are now going to be role models. So we're deliberately aligning men fellowship, we're aligning women fellowship to speak and be that impactful. And as well, we're deliberately taking serious steps to expose young people to right context, right.
Wow.
We have programs we want to take our children ministry to university context. Through a university, just get inside the lecture room and get that feeling so that moment can be imprinted in their psychology, in their minds, and aspire to be there, dream to be there.
Wow.
We're trying to shape what they dream, how they dream, make sure they're exposed to another side of life, even another side of church, with God as someone close to them that loves them. They are of such value that they can serve God on who they are. That speaks to the purpose I spoke about earlier.
One of the things I noticed is that whenever I meet you at a church activity, you always have 2 or 3 young people with you. Is that a deliberate strategy on your part?
Indeed, it's part of a very critical strategy on my part. Actually, as we speak now, I get texts here of the young guys asking me, we have a youth conference in the Highfield tomorrow. They want to go, they're excited about it, they want to learn the church. So in all areas of the church, be it the assembly, the presbytery, it is a deliberate step that young people, I take them who are available for that period to go and just sit and listen and know their church. It's amazing the questions they ask after such services. Ask deep, critical questions. Young people are inquisitive, and we're denying them the opportunity to do that. And that's why they go and ask questions at wrong places, wrong people, and go and express that inquisitivity elsewhere. Whereas they can find purpose, they can find life and meaning in the church. We're seeing transformation that is taking place from young guys who were really stressful to their parents, doing nothing with their lives, and just me taking them to such a meeting, hearing people express themselves in English just inspires them to go back to school and learn and see that.
And I imagine while you're traveling in the car with them, they start talking to you about, hey, I've got a girlfriend, and you can talk to them about the values that they have in that relationship, or if the day were to come that there'd be some crisis in their life, you're there to begin to help them process those life events.
Definitely, it's so heartwarming when you hear most of young people say, "You are the first person I'm telling you this."
Any other strategies that you're employing in the congregation?
Integration of all ministries or all age groups and as well with together with mission. What we do is that every in our congregation, as you would know, we have the fellowships. So with the fellowships, what we have, like previously, is it the last month or so? The women fellowship, we're going to Mampuru prison. And what we did was that it shouldn't happen that each fellowship does their own thing. It's something that each ministry in the church can offer, can participate. So we asked Men Fellowship to buy some cosmetics and toiletries for inmates, all children ministry roles, cards, message cards, to tell every prisoner they love them and God loves them. Just so it is basically an integration of all ministries and everyone to see themselves as the role player in everything that is happening in the church. Nothing that is happening that must escape anyone in the church. If we say we are fasting, we say let's do a fast for half day or a full day. Let's buy. That's what we did on Saturday, this past Saturday. That meal we give it to someone. We don't just
Wow.
fast. So in our fasting, we give a meal to someone else. And in that, we're just creating this culture of love, mission, discipleship, and a good citizen at the same time.
What I'm loving is the sense of very deliberateness. You started out by, with strategy, and you followed that up with synergy, and there's a very clear intention to be practical. Are you seeing that that's bearing fruit?
Still beyond expectation, I should say. In these 4 years, the fruits that I'm seeing in the church are so beyond comprehension, beyond expectation. It's just amazing. The response also with the growth in numerically, also spiritually, is just amazing. When we started to have intercessions last year, from an hour before the service, and in most of the service I was alone when it started for quite a number of months. Now it's not even attended an intercession, not by less than 10 people. Will come in the morning to just pray and ask the Lord to lead the service and take charge and guide us.
Nelson, thank you for being with us. I'm sure we're going to have another conversation at some point, but thank you for sharing your heart and what God is doing. And thank you for this time.
Heidi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our conference. We're very, very privileged to have you chat with us today. For any in our denomination or anyone else who's joining this video, do you want to just share a little bit about who you are, what your role is, why you might be interviewed by Presbyterians, all of that?
So I'm a clergy person, first of all, 26 years in the ordained ministry to Word and Sacrament. I serve a beautiful community, St. Barnabas United Church, all the way in Florida on the West Rand. And it's been an absolute delight to work alongside the people of God in that particular space and them with us. I'm a mother to 2 young adults. What a challenge, but also a joy, I love life in the fullest form. I love travel. I love music. I love reading. I love to grow myself. An advocate for women and women's emancipation. I work very hard in the spaces of GBV prevention, as well as child and human trafficking. And so I put a lot of effort into the spaces where meaning making happens and transformation in the lives of people who have a struggle getting to the places where they can have life and live it in the best way that they can, which is very far from what the gospel says that we are gifted, and that is a life of abundance in the name, in Christ. And so the work is hard, the work is tedious, but it also is fulfilling, and one needs to stay true to calling. So I try to balance life and faith as best I can. And so in terms of my ecclesial context beyond St. Barnabas, I'm the current chairperson of the South African Synod, which is one synod in the congregational denomination, which is transnational. And so I have the servant role to serve in that particular capacity. Also in CUC spaces, which is likely why I'm invited into a conversation, is because of my ecclesial context. So that's in a nutshell.
I've been in your congregation. It's been such a joy. And I've been in your congregation when you've been there, which is always so lovely. Often we visit other people's congregations when the minister's not there. And I've had the privilege of preaching while you were there, and got a lovely glimpse of just how vibrant your congregation is and how much they love you. And so we are talking about discipleship this evening, and we would just love to know what it is that's working for you. So what do you think about, what are your thoughts about discipleship in congregational work?
Quite important in terms of discipleship making. The focus in the context of, I love the concept of what we were taught when we were children: look, listen, and stay alive.
Look, listen, and stay alive. Lovely. How does that work in church?
So look at where we are, who we are, what we are. Listen for the things said and the things not said, and stay alive by keeping alive that which works, but also move in the parameters where you've got to stretch what is unfamiliar, introduce what is unknown, stretch in terms of the things that are not necessarily growth points for some, because it's uncomfortable or different. So for us, a strong component has been the importance of Christian education. We had a Christian education arm, which was quite dynamic in terms of what is the church growth going to compose of and who needs to participate, which is the congregation. So there's a slogan or a stance by the people who live with disabilities in the congregational context that has the following statement: nothing about us without us. And it's something that I particularly am mindful of in how we disciple. Cannot be a top-down, this is what the council feels, this is what the council sees, this is what the council recognizes, without the input, the invited input and buy-in of the congregation. Over time, we've had developmental growth seminars. We've had time away in terms of retreat. We've had time away as a congregation to just look at who we are and what it is that God is calling us to in a new decade, in a new phase of our lives. And I guess as I considered coming to this conversation, one of the places we now need to revisit is, what are we in a post-COVID ecclesial context? Life and faith, how have we been shaped? And what is it that the church is called to in terms of discipling? What needs to be looked at? Another component for us is the strong sense of Bible studies that have been held over years, continue to be held present day. A third component now, which is growing beautifully and is the concept is a cell church and cell groups, but it's not called that. We call it fellowship engagements, so that people have an understanding that the participatory role and the reciprocation within it has a mutual component. Church and them and us, but we don't use that kind of language. We talk about being faith family, life and faith intertwined in that. I'm encouraged by it, and I get feedback from the life groups. I want to call them life groups, faith and life groups. And what we are what we are encouraged by is the teenage, young adult components of families learning that they can be church and grow in a particular way that is not rigid and limiting and Sunderish only and too wordy and boredom by sermons by death and other. But that also grows out of our curriculum for our confirmation group, which has elements of mission engagement, mission understanding, which is deliberately built into that program. It has the alpha youth component in it. And that veers a little bit away from the norm in terms of what we know in terms of curriculum and other. So for us, those are the components: the Sunday component in terms of worship and life, pastoral care and living that. So for me, that has been components of discipling.
Sure. So you've mentioned a whole bunch of things that have worked really, really well. What are some of the challenges that you are facing in your specific context?
One of the greatest challenges is life beyond confirmation. That time period after school and university, that particular age group and growth group, meeting those particular needs in terms of what is required, the kind of congregational age average that you meet and how to bring all of those components together. It necessitated us to apply the look, listen, and stay alive principle in my head, but obviously differently expressed within the context of the church, that had us invite an external facilitator to do the looking in and the listening by the invited group that we have referenced. And we are now looking at how to do worship and church reform. So that's a process that has started. It is a process that calls for young people to participate. It lands us in a place where we co-opt onto church council, the leaders in those respective spaces, and says, be a voice and participate, share what you feel we need to listen to and listen for. And that has been a process which is ongoing, where the listening and how to stay alive in a practical way as a church and as a congregation requires action from the church council and the church leaders, but also an embrace from the church parishioners in terms of what it is that is brought from the younger component of who we are as family.
So I just want to clarify, you got a consultant in specifically to look at your young people.
To listen for what it is that we are missing post-confirmation, and also leading into integration into the life of the church. It can't be the same old works, but do we need to listen for something new that needs to be brought in?
Have you found that you've had much pushback on that, or have people been quite excited?
So the excitement and the levels of leadership is there. The excitement in terms of those who have participated is there. We still have to filter in the feedback to the congregation and go from there. So those are the steps that we need to do. But the first two steps we've done. It is now the reporting back to us, and then how we're going to filter it through to the congregation.
Okay, fantastic. So you mentioned your young people. And you've also mentioned sort of Bible studies, fellowship groups, pastoral care. How does discipleship look in those areas?
Definitive in terms of working towards embrace and partnership in terms of gospel sharing, pilgrim partnership.
Okay.
Inviting. One of the things that I've seen as an outflow from the leadership in relation to discipling is the lay leaders that are developing in terms of lay ministry and lay preaching, which is not a component that was there in the context of the church. That excites me greatly.
Yes. That's fantastic. So you actually see growth. What would you say some of your biggest breakthroughs have been in the area of discipleship?
The priesthood of all believers, so the participation of the laity. Response to life outside of Sunday worship. So an extension of discipling and ministry outside of Sunday worship, because it cannot just be the hour and a half, it's got to be beyond. And for me, it is the partnership in that understanding of what discipling looks like for us as church families. And it's not dependent on me, and it's not dependent on the leaders only, but it is the collective. Those are the things that really excite me.
So the congregation kind of taking responsibility themselves for discipling.
Absolutely exciting.
That is really, really beautiful. Do you have any stories you can share of a situation where this has happened and it's had a beautiful outcome?
The thing that I like is that a little 9-year-old boy said to me one morning, Auntie Heidi, I'd like to read in church. He's now a young man of 19, and he's come through programmatic facilitated programs at the church, in fellowship engagements and in other, and prays so beautifully, and is able to lead a group of young people in that particular space. The leaders of our confirmation group are young people that are part of the family, and that has stepped into a role that says, we'd like to give back, and this is how we'd like to give back, because the language of the young of this particular peer group is our language, and we'd like to feed into that. Participation of members in aspects of worship and liturgy on a Sunday is a moment that encourages me. How people have engaged in terms of fellowship and friendships that I've developed is an encouragement.
Yeah. How would you encourage other ministers perhaps to engage with their sessions or their leadership on this? How did you get sort of your leadership on board with regards to discipleship?
Jackie, openness about we need to consider what is maintenance versus mission. And that is a hard conversation to have, because the understanding is if this ship runs well, why fiddle with it? But then there's the component, so the ship runs well because the maintenance aspect of it works very well. But what is the outcomes that will please God in relation to beyond the four walls?
Yeah.
And so that shift, maintenance, mission, how do we move? How do we keep consistent? How do we listen so that we too don't fall in a rut? That now that we've brought in a shift and a movement by the Spirit, where the Spirit has led us, that we stay there necessarily, because so much changes and so much requires us to listen attentively and act upon how the Spirit guides in that particular way. It's a slow process, but it's a mindful process. It's a work in progress process. And it's important to take people with you in the shift, in the move that you are leaning into and leaning from. So that was how I inserted the kind of teaching in that particular space.
It sounds very intentional.
Very
like
intentional.
Very intentional that you have a goal. This is where we're wanting to go, and consistently bringing your people along. Heidi, is there anything else you'd like to say on discipleship? Anything else you'd like to share?
It starts in your home. Don't leave that to external people to do that. And it's the same for a church. The external teachers and facilitators don't necessarily have the same core understanding of the gospel. And they are competing for the attention and the voices of all our people. So we've got to be intentional, we've got to be deliberate, we've got to be gentle with ourselves, but we've got to be purposeful in our disciple making.
That's a beautiful, beautiful place to leave this. Thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome. Blessings to you all.
Madoda, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you to members of the UPCSA Mission and Discipleship Committee, the entire community of Christian faith. My name is Madoda Mfene. I'm based in the Presbytery of Western Cape. I'm ministering in the Osoga Memorial Congregation, I think for the past 17 years. I've been in that community. I'm married with Nokolo Mfene. We've got 3 kids, 2 sons and 1 daughter, which all of them are in the university. I love being in conversation that matters. That's me. So I love reading. I'm passionate about the theology of creation, which I'm also passionate about it. So that's who am I, Madoda Mfene.
What are your thoughts? What do you think about discipleship and implementing discipleship in the local congregation?
I'm grateful to the visit that I did in the PUSA, I think in 2017, where I was hosted by the First Presbyterian Church in Pensacola, Florida. I think we were hosted, I attended a seminar which was done by Glenn MacDonald, who was a minister in the then UPCSA Presbyterian Church, I think, where he shared with us that he has been a minister in that church for years, and it was business as usual. And one day, while they were still busy, with all local organization like your session and everything, and then he said, towards the end of that long session meeting, then one guy said, simple question, how long it can take for someone who visit our church to learn about his or her own need for Jesus. And I think he said to me, there was dead silent in that room. And I think for him, what was important, it was more of a profound transformation that began that day. And all their programs for ministry, which have long been focusing on what he called ABC Church, attendance, buildings, and catch, went by and they were dead. And there was this need to change, to examine this question in light of Christ's change, go forth and make disciples. And I think what he said for me was very profound. And then he raised three things that in the context of local church, we need to ask ourselves this question: what are indispensable elements of knowing, loving, and walking with Jesus? Because I think that's, for him and for me, that was key from that. And then he raised three things which has influenced me personally, and I've tried to put it within the context in which I minister. First, disciples need to know the Christian story, and they need to know how to read their Bibles. Secondly, we need to learn basic theology. We don't all need to be systematic theologians, but we should all know who God is, who we are as both image bearers and sinners, what Jesus has done for us, and what our internal hope is in the resurrection of the dead. And then thirdly, he said, if we want to build these disciples, we need spiritual habits like prayer, meditation, evangelism, fasting. And he said these shape and form us into that image of Jesus. And then knowing the Bible as a basic story, basic doctrines, and basic habits will help us to stand in faith during the darkness nights of the soul. One of my colleagues, I think in that meeting, said that we preach the truth in the light so that we can stand on that truth when it's dark. That's what discipleship does for us.
And Milan now always talks about this. He says we need to not just spoon feed people who come to church once a week, but we need to teach them to become self-feeding, self-nourishing, self-growing, self-nurturing believers who can stand on their own feet and who can live out the faith. How do you do that in your community, and what are the challenges and opportunities that you have in the context where you serve?
Leading a church to be a discipling church, I think one needs to look at these things. For me, one of the challenges that we face, we've got leaders who themselves haven't been disciples. They don't really know how to disciple others. You'll find that in your church, where you will come in a community where you will make that assumption. So we do have leaders who themselves haven't been discipled, and they don't really know how to disciple others. And it's hard to teach what you have never been experienced. No, if in your local congregation this has never been, it's even harder to admit that you haven't been discipled. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face. And many believers assume they're already being discipled. They already know, because they have read go and make disciples. That's because too many churches have defined discipleship as if you attend a small group, a worship, you are a disciple. I think I tend to concur with what I've just said about Prof. now, because many people assume they have already been discipled because they come to church, they do that. And few churches have a clear discipleship pathway. Even if they are trying to do discipleship, their strategy is disconnected or is unclear. Good discipleship requires leaders to refocus much of what they do. Discipleship requires intentional focus, which means leaders must adjust their schedule, typically by giving up something. Other leaders try to disciple but give up too soon. So I think those are some of the challenges. There are many. For me, there are 5 important tasks for every local church that they should do. Prayer and worship. Prayer and worship, I think for me, are the first foremost functions of any church. They strengthen the relationship with God and bring a collective power to preach the gospel. Church members strengthen their faith and communicating with God and prayer with one another. Teaching and Bible study, teaching. In my context, one of the opportunities we have, teaching starts, when a member joins our church. There is a form, and that form they fill. It's not a form that you say, fill, bring it to us. We gave that form. You take it home, pray over it, and tell us, why are you joining us? What is it? It's not about Bible studies, but there is a process or teaching and Bible study, because it helps members understand God's word and apply it in their own lives. By helping the poor, the suffering, the disadvantaged, the church puts God's life into action. This also inspires others to join. Remember early this year we had fires in Danone. We went there. I'm telling you, ever since we have been in that community, our numbers in the Danone area are increasing. Preaching the gospel, another important function of local church is preaching the gospel. The church not only works for spiritual growth for its members, but also it works to bring in the message of God's salvation to people around the world. Lastly, for me, another one I would say is an opportunity is developing a community and a collaborative effort is very important. The church plays a very important role in spreading a sense of unity and cooperation in the community. Church members work together to build a sense of love and support for each other. This creates a strong church that helps each other and practitioners in God's work. You saw John chapter 13, verse 35. You must love one another, and this will show that the world, you are my disciples.
Wow. Madadi, you've given us lots to think about there. I want to zoom in on something you said about leadership, because I think this is key. We don't actually spend time with our leaders, helping them to become people who will be disciple makers.
How do we get best leaders? How do we make sure that leadership in the church reflects, what one with the 7 principles that are centered around the Bible? I always say, 1, there must be intentional relationship building. And for example, I know how important is the session, but in the church that I serve, we've got what we call leadership meetings every month. We've got only 4 sessions in a year, but leadership is everybody, fellowships, zones, district, cell groups. Those leaders, we meet every month to reflect what we call leadership, to look at the life and work of the church.
Wow.
The session is more of a strategic. It deals with strategic issues, but operational issues we deal with them. So we do regular meetings, establishing consistent meetings for mentorship and fellowship, personalized attention, tailored discipleship program to meet individual needs and context, active listening, because one of the most important aspects of leadership is active listening. Practice active listening to understand and to support your leaders through their challenges. Effective communication. Clearly and compassionate communication is vital. Provide feedback, continuous learning and growth, education programs, mentorship training, equip mentors, resource accessibility. So there are areas where there can be continuous learning and growth. And it's very, very important that if you want to build a discipling community, these are very key.
Tell us about some of the things that you've implemented that have really that have worked well and have brought breakthroughs.
Every year, every member that joins Tiosoka, they are taken through what I call as the 6 marks of a disciple. Because we make clear that when you join this church, we are a discipleship making church from dry bones to spiritual vitality. So part of being a member of Teosoka, we make sure you understand a heart for Christ alone, a mind transformed by the word, arms of love, knees for prayer, a voice to speak the good news, and a spirit of servanthood and stewardship. So these are the 6 marks of a disciple. In addition to that, there are other tools that we're using for example, a Going for Growth movement, a Alpha course, and some of the online training that the Mission and Discipleship has made. So I think all those tools, they help us.
What breakthroughs have you had?
I think for me, there are a lot of positives, as your question have said. I think they always say that the breakthroughs that I've seen, it is better to fail with a plan than to fail without a plan. And I think for me, what the breakthroughs that I've picked it up is that the importance of having a strategy or a clear path to achieve your goals is important. Building a discipleship movement is possible, but whoever wants to do this, he must be intentional of doing this. The last time I checked, we had about 720 members. And when I joined, we had 165. And our focus has been building a very strong discipleship movement within the church. I think it works. It takes time, but it just needs patience. It needs plans, it needs strategies, and it also needs passion and listening. Above all, it also needs that kneels for prayer. You must be praying a community.
Is there anything else that you would leave with us as we close?
I would say, lastly, some of us, I know we are impatient, but I can conclude by saying discipleship takes time. Even when we live under the power of the Holy Spirit, our growth into Christ-likeness is seldomly a quick process. In fact, it doesn't end this side of heaven. How long would it take for someone who visits our church to learn about his or her need for Jesus and to find out what to do about it?
That's a very powerful note to end on. Thank you. Madoda, we have learned so much from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Theo. Good night.
A big thank you to our 3 interviewees. I think you've given us lots to think about. What stood out to you as you listened to these interviews? How were you challenged? What would you implement, and what would be something that you would want to talk about a little bit more? Come and join us on Wednesday the 24th online at 10 o'clock, where we will have our interviewees present and we'll be able to share our thoughts and ideas with one another about this very important topic of discipleship.